Hi, Gina Ornelas.
Hi, Angel. How are you?
I'm so happy that you agreed to do this lounge chat with me because I know our last lounge chat we had so much fun talking about EMDR and talking about just that method of therapy and how it is so impactful for people and really giving them a deeper awareness of, why we need different types of therapy and things like that, why we can't just go through life and ignore a lot of the things that we think, oh, they can just let it go or move on or get past it. And
Yeah.
the topic that we're going to talk about today being one that everybody can resonate with, right? Yeah. So we're
If you
talking,
live long enough, you have been through this.
right? We're talking
Yes.
today about grief. And, as we were mentioning before we started the recording, there's so many different kinds of grief. And you being a specialist in, family marriage, you talk about your title, but in you being a specialist in, just these different therapies where you work with people in these deep places. And then me and what I do in helping them kind of bridge that,
Yeah.
the soul ties and all those different aspects of what that looks like. I want to come together and kind of talk about our different angles of grief. So can you share a little bit about, just from your perspective, what it is and what people don't realize about it?
Oh gosh. Well, I think we ignore grief in our culture because it's like everybody goes through that at some point. But I don't think people realize that we get stuck and our culture does not have appropriate rituals and ways to help people grieve. You know what I mean? We show up to a funeral, we have a potluck, and then no one calls anybody again. Like a friend of mine that lost her daughter told me a couple weeks ago that another friend asked her, really, you still cry about that? Oh, of course she did. It doesn't matter that
Wow.
it was a decade ago. She lost her daughter. So there's
Yeah,
this expectation that you're supposed to go back to normal instead of realizing you're in a new normal.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's probably the first thing I would want to say. The second thing is that our society likes prescriptions for things that are painful. So there's this idea of I'm going to go through these steps and then I'm going to be fine. And that's not true. It's not a linear
No,
process. It's up and
no.
down, it's all around. I think you earlier with me used the word layered. That is true. There's also a big difference between anticipatory grief versus out of the blue traumatic
Mm,
grief.
yeah.
And I've experienced both, and most
Mm.
people have experienced both, and they're very different.
Yeah, they're very
Yeah.
different. And you
Mhm.
were even talking about, the way that that impacts the body. And I know, like, for me, I've experienced some significant losses. My first one really that sticks out in my memory was I had just met my adopted father. I was 12 years old, and how I met my adopted father was that I went to my grandparents' house, and because my mom remembered where they lived, they called my dad,
Yeah.
and that's how I came into contact with him. And within that year, my grandma was like, I want to take you places, I want you to get to know everyone, I want
Oh,
everyone to get to know you. And I just had found out I was adopted. I didn't even know I was adopted. So here
right.
now, this woman that I am like relating to and resonating with, and I feel like her and similar, and then
Mhm.
they both die in an accident, like traumatic, like sudden, right? And so that was the first one. Then the second, of course, being like my grandma, which, she was older. But when I lost my mom, and that was
Yeah.
the one where you said anticipatory. I can't say
Yes, it's hard to
that.
say. Yeah.
That was when, I said we found out she was sick, and then, a month later she was dead. And then my cousin, my
Mhm.
age, died just unexpectedly, like, and I say unexpectedly meaning, it wasn't, yeah, traumatic. And so the reason why I'm mentioning this is because you said that how it affects the body. I developed a frozen shoulder. And what was
No
interesting,
kidding.
my shoulder literally was like, I couldn't move it. It was the weirdest, oddest thing. I had never
Oh,
heard of
I
it.
believe it.
Oh my gosh, they did an MRI, everything, right? And it was the craziest thing. When I was doing my work and my physical like work to try and maneuver my arm, my shoulder, do you know what came up? It was me not grieving my cousin's death. So that it was this powerlessness, and it was that, like, when Susan worked on my shoulder at one time,
Yeah.
and I just started bawling as if I had just found out that he died, and it had already been like a year and a half.
The freeze response is a real thing.
It's a real thing, and people don't relate the
Yeah.
two. You know what I mean? Yeah. I was just going to say, you want to talk a little bit about, well, I really want to get into the layers and help people identify what some of those layers of grief are. And I really want them to understand, like you said, it's not this, okay, 5 steps and then I'm done. And that's the one thing that I realized. Everybody kept saying, all these terms I wish people just wouldn't say, like, in time will heal and all of these different things. And really, grief looks different for every person, especially depending on who they lost and what that looked like.
Well, and the nature of the relationship. When you have regret and guilt, that's a whole other thing.
Or unresolved,
unresolved. And not all grief or loss is trauma. And not all grief and loss leaves you traumatized. So let me give you 2 examples from my own life that I usually give people that I'm teaching EMDR to. So whenever a traumatic event happens or a loss happens, there's a part of us that is really wise and knows the right thing to say to us internally. And then there's another part of us that feels the pain and has what I would call distortions of self. So the example I like to use is, gosh, it's been 6 years now, but my last grandparent died 6 years ago, my grandmother, my dad's mom, and she was 90. And so it's not like it's out of the blue, but it felt a little out of the blue. She had her appendix out, and poor thing, I know she didn't want to wake up from surgery, but she did. And so she was in the hospital for a little bit. And so the last time I ever saw her was in the hospital. I brought my daughter with me, who was 6, because she had made a card for Gigi. And we get to the hospital room and my dad's there and we're kind of talking. And then it was time for us to leave. And we all 4 of us held hands and prayed. So, I mean, that's a really beautiful last memory, right? All 4 generations prayed together. So a couple weeks later, we're having a family vacation at the beach. And I'm in the sand with my kids, and my husband goes, and I go, oh, what did I do now? I'm in trouble. And I see my dad behind him on the phone and pacing. And I'm like, that's weird. But I'm like, well, dad is weird sometimes. Okay. So my husband says to me, your grandma died this morning. And I was like, what? No, wait a minute. I was going to see her this week because she had been back in her assisted living place and I had this plan to go visit her. So instant guilt, Angel, instant. Wow. I'm a bad granddaughter. So I go to the other, where my mom was sitting on the beach. And I said, I was going to go see grandma this week. And she goes, oh, honey, if there's anything my mom taught me is when you love somebody, you'll find a reason to feel guilty after they pass. And she gave me the reason that she felt guilty when her mom passed, and how her mom felt guilty when her mom passed, and on down the line. And then I was like, oh, that's true. So the part of me that was in pain and felt guilty started to weave in this, in EMDR language, we call it the adaptive adult perspective, which is oh, guilt is a sign that you love somebody. Okay. And then as the day went on, it dawned on me oh my God, she's with the Lord. What was that? What is it like for her right now? And then that wove in. And I thought, she really hasn't been having fun the last couple of years. Good for her. And by the time we drove home from the beach, I had completely resolved it, was glad for her. Went home and found a letter she wrote me, started preparing for the funeral. It was truly a celebration.
Yeah.
That is very different than when I was 8 years old and my mom's dad was killed in a car accident.
Wow.
That memory needed a lot of help, even as an adult, because I was very confused. No one explained it to me well, and it was stuck for over 30, or I'd say around 30 years, was very stuck. So when a traumatic loss happens, your body has a response and kind of holds on to that moment of panic.
Yeah.
And it really kind of inhibits the grieving process.
Yes.
And that's what I found in my own practice. So I don't know if you want me to kind of explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's actually what I experienced when my cousin died, because it was like I froze. It was like, and I didn't even realize I froze, but I froze in the disbelief, like,
Yeah.
no. And it was weird because I thought I had grieved, but it halted really that deep grief. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Well, this is not anything I learned from research or school. This is purely anecdotally.
Even better.
Because I don't know why this happened. But I think it was 8 years. Yeah, it was 8 years ago, over 8 years ago. I was pregnant with my son, and all my clients at that point were grieving. And I was like, what the heck? I mean, literally, like, client after client, that's what they were processing, was grief. And it dawned on me that when it is a traumatic loss, even anticipated losses can have moments of trauma. It really keeps the rest of the grief from processing. So there was one lady in particular, and I've talked about her when I teach EMDR and stuff, because this is so, like, clear in my mind. She came to me because all of a sudden she was anxious and she didn't know why. She went from really kind of being easy breezy, at least that was her perception of herself, to popping Xanax like they were like M&Ms, you know what I mean? Like all day long. And so she comes to my office and she's getting ready to retire. And I said, I think your anxiety is tied to your upcoming retirement. And she's like, oh, no, I've been planning to retire for all these years. I'm really glad. I mean, she was like, I'm so happy about it. And I said, well, that doesn't mean anything. It's still a loss.
Yeah.
So I take her history. Lo and behold, 20 years earlier, she had lost her daughter.
Wow.
And I said, I think we need to process the loss of your daughter. And she was like, I mean, because she's older than me. At that point, I was like 30, I think. And she's like, oh, honey, she's kind of patronizing. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I've really processed that. And I said, okay, well, tell me how you process it. And she goes, I've talked to my priest. I've been a part of grief groups. Really, it's okay. And I said, I'm not saying you haven't processed it, but what you mean when you say process is not what I mean by process.
Right.
And so I said, tell me what happened to your daughter. Her daughter had had a chronic disease, but not something life-threatening. There was a complication, and then she was intubated. And when I said to her, oh, so your daughter was intubated? I mean, she just broke. I mean, just like gasping. So then I started to think about other clients, and I was like picturing these moments of panic.
Yeah.
Either when they hear the loved one has died, they hear the loved one is sick, watching their loved one go through what we call terminal agitation, which is the end stage where people really fight crossing over. And so I said to my friend who had lost her daughter, I said, when you think of your daughter in the hospital before she died, and, you know, she has the tubes and she just burst, just like my client did. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. And then my friend ended up getting EMDR and getting help for it, because I totally had like triggered her trauma. And she said, I can't watch any medical shows. And this friend of mine was in a good place. She had read some books about grief. She had been to therapy. I mean, she was living her life again.
Yeah.
But a piece of her was stuck. So all that to say, from an EMDR perspective, when the moment of panic and terror finally releases from the body, then that person, I mean, they'll call me a few days later and say, I have been crying for 3 days. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I know that sucks. And they go, well, at least I'm finally crying.
Yeah.
And
that it was
finally
moving.
it's moving.
It's moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's the thing that I noticed in working with all of the clients that I've worked with, is that one, I have to comment too on the guilt thing. It's almost like they feel like they love them more the more guilty they are.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
completely noticed that. And it's such a lie, right? And it's just, it's so beautiful when you see them come out of agreement with that lie and into truth, then that, they can start having some of that movement. But what
It's a
I,
natural thing, but it keeps us stuck. And in
yeah,
EMDR, when someone's eyes are moving and they're processing the loss, and I say something like, "And what would your mother say about this guilt?" They go, "She would think it's ridiculous.
right.
Of course
Yeah.
she knows that I loved her." Or my grandma would say to me, "Gina, you're busy. You have 2 little kids in a private practice. It's really okay that you didn't visit me."
Yeah.
That's what she would say to me if she could.
Yeah.
And that processes it.
And, or in a circumstance with unresolved, the person might say, they want me to be in guilt. They want me to, to be in this place.
No.
And that is where it's like, that opens up so much depth in the layers that freedom is needed. You know what I'm saying? Because
Well, that's a whole other trauma target.
absolutely, because and that's the thing, that this is what I mean too. One of the layers,
Yeah.
grief opens up these things. It gives these things an opportunity to be dealt with where they weren't otherwise there available. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. My mentor always says when he's teaching EMDR that dead people always say the right things, like when we're processing it. And then I've said, no, that's not always true.
No. Especially when you're really with Jesus, hearing what they're saying.
Yes. And here's the thing. So if the dead person is not saying the things that would help you or I or our clients heal, that means that the traumatic target is actually different. Then from an EMDR perspective, we target the dead father, let's say, that said, "I wish you were never born," to their son.
Yeah.
Or the dead father that never went to the baseball game. Then we actually, that's more complicated grief because we actually
Yes.
have trauma from that person that's never resolved. And now they've passed.
That's what happened with my mom, with me and my
Yeah.
mom. And it was so convoluted, the layers. And it was funny because I did more work and I had more opportunity to get truth from her when she passed, because it was like those things that she wouldn't own for herself, acknowledge, the soul expressions, the part of her that couldn't be in that place of where she really resented me. She
Yeah.
resented that she had me. She resented that I ruined her life.
Mm.
And some people hearing this video would be like, oh, no way. But it's so freeing. Like, this was all so
It's
freeing for
just
me.
true.
It's true. And here's the
It's true.
truth, right? Outside of me being her daughter, being someone that wants her to be free, I can understand that. I can even
Yeah.
relate to it in some way. And so when her dying, actually, then I said, I'm going to lean into this opportunity to do everything that's opening up. I want to embrace that, because if her death is going to give me a gift, why in the world would I not want, like, in other words, some people get in false humility and they start saying, oh, well, like, that's disrespectful, or you got to honor them, or don't be
We go through that a lot
yeah. And you know what?
in
Here's
my
the
field.
thing. I absolutely just had to choose to, number one, unalign with the lie of that from the world's perspective, and not allow people's discomfort, their own discomfort of what they're not able and or willing to acknowledge for themselves. And I said, listen, and this is the whole point of why I love that we're doing this video. My grief has to look what I need it to look like, not what makes it easy for you, not what makes you feel better that you think I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
I need to not be okay for a while so that I can move through this grief. And it's not going to look, because everybody, was praising my mom and she was so wonderful. Well, yeah, there were aspects of her that she was a wonderful person, but I'm
She
her daughter.
also hurt you very deeply.
Very deeply. And there were some other aspects that were not so. And I was in a place where I was like, I don't want the lies. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Get out of my face. Stop telling me how wonderful my mom was and let me heal. And that is where people can give themselves permission to let it be ugly and messy and all of the things that they don't give themselves permission to when the person is alive, especially. It's funny because when my mom passed, and some people watching this video may not know, and I know you know this, but when I engage in the spirit realm and I engage with the Lord, and a lot of times people that have passed over do then express there. And so I
Yeah.
got the opportunity to experience my mom in that place. And there was a lot of accusations against me that her younger self, her soul, right, the fragments of her soul were then projecting toward me. And what was beautiful about that was it gave me an opportunity to choose not so like generational, some people would call this generational curses, like what her mom did to her, the love that she didn't experience, all of that. So there was such a gift in me allowing myself to get real about what I didn't experience from my mom. And what I loved, though, in the spirit, it actually freed her, where she got to then relinquish from that bitter, resentful place in her heart. And the work I did with myself helped to do that. And this is how we're all linked, especially mothers, daughters, fathers, sons.
And you're confirming something that I've told my clients for a long time. I just didn't know the depth of it until now, because I always tell them, whether their parent is alive or dead, by you being truthful of your experience as their child is honoring to them.
Yes.
The truth is a way to honor them.
It frees them.
I'm not sitting in judgment. I'm not sitting in judgment of your parent, because I have to hold the fact that something was done to them. They were not a healed person when they birthed you. I was not a perfectly healed person when I birthed my kids.
Right.
That is just the truth of it.
It's the truth.
Doing the best with what we've
for
got.
us all.
And so when I sit with my therapist or people that are praying for me or my friends or even my parents themselves, and I say, you were not perfect, and when you said this, it hurt me, or the fact that you didn't pay attention to me during this point in my life, or whatever, that is honoring them, because now they get a chance to go, I didn't know I hurt you. I'm sorry. Or it's a matter of like, but I still love you. And we get the opportunity to love even though we've been sinned against.
And that
is what Christ asks of us.
Absolutely. And how that translates in the spirit. I actually got to witness my mom finally receive the love of Christ, which she could not receive the love from him here on earth. She, in her state, never felt lovable. I got to witness that. I got to witness my grandmother and my mom be freed in a place because I was willing to acknowledge that truth and to hold them accountable and not judge, but to go before the Lord and ask for the Lord then to come into that situation. And it was the most beautiful thing. And this is where people are deceiving themselves to believe that it's not honoring or loving. It is, like you said, it's the most loving thing. And here's the thing. I broke generational ties and all kinds of things in me choosing to get into truth. So when I saw my mom finally receive the love from God, I saw every part of her that sought that from a man here on earth receive. It was the most beautiful gift she could have ever given me, because I never ever saw her in my lifetime feel loved, truly loved. And I got to see that not only for her receiving it, but from the Father. Like I got to witness that. And so this is the thing where people don't realize grief is such a pathway for us to work within heaven and earth. You know what I'm saying? And even if they don't have that level of consciousness, it doesn't matter if they honor what their grief looks like and they honor what they need, even if that's, I'm going to cry 5 months, or, I'm going to celebrate, whatever that looks like for them. I'm angry, if they honor that, then the Lord can meet them there in that place of truth. But if we're constantly trying to be in this facade where it's like, oh yeah, they were so good. We're not. It's
the fancy word for that is spiritual bypass.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right. So I would have no way to count on my hands or my fingers how many clients I've had that minimize their grief because they feel like if they tap into that pain, they're not being a faithful Christian because they've been told we grieve with hope. Yeah,
Right.
well, Angel,
Right.
we grieve with hope, but we still grieve. There is a time to mourn, and
Absolutely.
that is holy. And so there's a lot of spiritual bypassing. I mean, I had a dear friend who lost her 12-year-old son, who was on life support, and it was over something he had done to himself. We still don't know his intentions. And lots of people surrounded us that were that meant well, but were like, oh, isn't God good? Because he arranged this or that while we're at the hospital and we got a free lunch. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I know I
Yeah.
care out with these people. I'm not going to name any names. Because I think it was a holy thing to sit in that waiting room and weep
Yeah.
over
To
this
just
child.
hurt. Yeah. To just be in the, in that pain. Yeah. And that's
Yes.
where a lot of people don't. Now, I'm not saying that they don't maybe not have the capacity for it, but even in willingness to be uncomfortable, but just leaning in and engaging the pain is often where we can really experience that movement, right? Beyond our own strength, but really be met there. I know that that's one of the things that when I with my mom, it was so crazy because I was in shock. And you know what was the most shocking thing for me? Not her laying next to me in my bed and me holding her hand. That wasn't the most shocking. The most shocking thing for me was when the coroner came and I saw that gurney. It's still,
Oh,
it's
it's
like even,
terrible.
it's yeah. And I literally, my little girl, I ran out of the room. I ran to the corner of my living room, went down on the floor behind the couch, and I looked at Dawn and I was like, you've got to do this for me. And then I ran over there and I was just screaming. And it was the
Yeah.
craziest thing because I don't even, I remember it so well, but I was not inside myself. You know what I mean?
You
Like I
can't
was,
be.
no, I was so outside of myself. And when I went back and re-engaged it with the Lord, and I was like, okay, what pockets of time am I not connecting to? Where am I not in connecting to myself in these times? And it was so interesting because like you said, when we found out when she was fighting that part of her that
Yeah, the
you know,
agitation.
it was hard. And you know what was the other hardest thing for me? And this is just because I mean, you know, the level of awareness I had when her pain level increased so much that
Yeah.
the pain meds that they were giving her stopped working. So she was in agony. So they started to give her like Xanax for the anxiety. All it did was it made her unable to talk or speak, but she was still very
Oh.
present. I could feel her still like awake, wide awake, very present, trapped in her body. And I think for me, that was the hardest thing to do. It was like, and I knew she was going to die. The Lord had told me before even we knew like that literally from the doctor that she was going to die. And I already had known that. Thank God he told me that because I wouldn't have been able to do what I needed to do had I not known. But when everyone else was like, don't give up hope, don't give up hope. And the Lord had to give me literally supernatural strength because everything I was doing was helping her die. I was helping her die as comfortably as she could.
And that was the right thing to do for her.
It was the right thing to do for her. And it was not only the right thing to do for her, it was what she asked of me, like that she knew nobody else would do for her. And that in itself, I felt honor in that because even though it was horrific and hard, she trusted me. And my mom didn't trust anyone.
No.
So it was like I went back and I just found all this to say that I went back.
You did right by her, Angel.
I did right by her. And that's what I said. You know, it was like instead of guilt, I chose to say I was a good daughter. And maybe other people don't agree with what that looked like, but I knew in my heart that I was
but your mom.
Yeah. And so and why I'm emphasizing this is because how traumatic those different things were. I had so many layers, Gina, of how that impacted me. And you know this. I mean, you know this.
Yeah.
And then even the things that you don't know, it was so layered that if I would have put an expectation on myself, or I would have allowed myself to be disappointed because I didn't meet the timeline of when I was supposed to be better. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
even this is even kind of funny. I know you'll get this. I think it was about 3 years into it, I noticed that every time because she died on October 7th, October 7th, October 6th, and my birthday is the 29th of September. So I remembered every time my birthday would come around, I'd feel this dread, just
Oh
this
yeah,
in
because
my
the
stomach
anniversary's coming up.
dread. Yeah. And it was like that month, it was like, even though I knew I was not in that reality, my body was literally reliving that experience, right? And so I had to literally go in my timeline in the spirit and go into those markers and exchange them so that my body could move beyond that experience and re-register my true reality, right? And
Well, and
people don't know
EMDR
that.
takes care of that too. There's seasonal triggers
Yes.
that we're not always even aware of. I can't tell you how many clients where they're like, I don't know why every spring I start drinking again. Or I don't know why every August I'm full of dread. And then I go, oh, did you lose so-and-so? Oh yeah, I did lose my mom in August. Or I did, do you know what I mean? Because it's not
Yes.
conscious.
Mhm.
And when we have EMDR for the traumatic part of it, not just the grief, the terror, the shock, the horror of it, all those really intense feelings, then people go through that season and go, oh yeah, this is when my loved one died. Woo, okay. And then they move on.
Yeah.
And that is what our loved one wants for us. So we have a thing in EMDR, and you've been through EMDR, so you know that we take something that's disturbing and we give it a 0 to 10 rating.
Yes.
And the goal is to bring it to 0.
Mhm.
And then we do some other woo stuff and send you on your way.
Yeah.
We kind of have an understanding that as clinicians, that when someone has lost someone and they say it can't go past a 1 or a 2, we know that's a 0.
Yeah.
They just can't say that because it feels insulting.
Wrong or
So
bad.
it feels wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just tell my clients, you know, as Christians, we're not supposed to be okay with death. We're not wired for it.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
Mhm.
We're not supposed to accept it. It is an unacceptable state that we're in. So we can be okay thinking about the memory of our loved one and not be okay with the fact that all is not made right yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Those are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And you know, it really does, right? Like you're kind of just emphasizing it also comes down to what we choose, right? Like what we choose to understand, allow, whether we want freedom. Some people say, well, I want truth, I want freedom. But because they align with the light, like they don't want to be dishonoring. So they're going to say it's a 1 because they don't want, like for me, it was so freeing. The last 2 years, like right now is that time. And I don't have that. I sense my mom. This is the first year, like I sense her, but it feels loving and endearing. I don't feel any any of the experience. And last year I didn't feel the experience, but I didn't feel her. And this year I feel more reconciled in my heart to feel her. So like this whole month, I've just been really sensing her differently and more strongly. You know what's interesting, what the Lord's pointing out to me to emphasize when you were just talking about the seasons? You know what's interesting is that a lot of people don't relate the seasons like that of grief, of losing themselves. Like, in other words, there's grief of loss of self, right?
I can't even.
Yes.
You're making me cry.
This is what a lot of people, and this is why we're doing the video right now, because it's one thing to experience losing another person. But when we experience losing and grieving ourselves, and we don't know that we're grieving ourselves and we're in this loss, you talk about anxiety and depression and, all of the ways in which we feel so disconnected and we're seeking and seeking. And here's where a lot of people too, like it comes in, right? This why? But when you're talking about the seasons, I remember when I realized and all this stuff about my rape came up, that part where my spirit and my soul just felt dead. You know what I mean? Like just felt dead. And I remember that it was like the time frame, I would wonder, why would I go into this really low state? And it was just like this sinking, this low, this like I had no drive. It was just like this
Yeah.
almost numbing out. And I thought, I'm not numbing out on purpose. Like I'm intentionally, but it was that loss of self. It was that cycle, that marker that was coming around. And I did not know that. And I had several of those from my domestic violence, you know what I mean? From all of these
Yeah.
different times when my spirit had then experienced death or my soul had experienced death, because they are a little bit
Mhm.
different. But there are ways in which we have these experiences that we don't relate grief to. So we don't
Yeah.
know how to somewhat take care of ourselves, nurture ourselves, get our needs met, whether it's therapy, EMDR, you know, for some people it's working out, or it's, you know, cranial sacral, or it's spiritual healing, whatever that looks like. But it's vital because that's not something that we can necessarily do on our own.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know what I
No,
mean?
we're meant to do it with somebody, and our
Yes.
culture is not set up for that. And I really feel as a church, and I mean capital C church, not any individual church,
Yeah.
we have lost the ability to lament
Mhm.
completely. And it's
Mhm.
almost sinful to, or seen as sinful to be in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when someone is suffering, I wrote about this once and it went viral and I felt a little bit famous because I was just pointing
I
out
love
something I
that.
thought, well, I thought it was kind of obvious that like it's almost anytime I've ever worked on somebody who witnessed a child drowning, which is like one of the most horrific things. I can't even, but people live through it. It's always at a party where everybody else thinks the other person is watching the child.
Mm.
And as the body of Christ, we do the same thing where, for instance, like I had an incident 6 years ago, you know this, and we're coming up on that season, and I have not been the same since physically. A lot of things have been restored, you know, spiritually and emotionally. Physically, I have not been restored yet. And I think what happens is, and don't get me wrong, I have lots of friends that have been amazing and faithful, but I do think there's the sense of, well, someone else has got Gina. Someone
Mm.
else is doing this. Someone else is doing that. And they assume that the suffering or the grieving person is okay because they're not saying, hey, I'm suffering. And here's the
Yeah.
thing, drowning people, Angel, cannot say, help, I need help.
Right.
They are under the water.
Mhm.
And everybody
Yes.
else is enjoying the party, thinking someone else is attending to somebody who's literally underwater. Like, if I'm underwater, which I have been the last 6 years, I do not have the energy to say, hey, don't forget about me.
Yeah. Yeah. Over
So
here.
right. So as a church, we have to go underwater and look for our friends and
Mhm.
bring them a bottle of wine, bring them a meal,
Yeah.
or just say, I mean, I've had clients that have said it's really helpful when someone just says, how's your grief going? And they can
Mhm.
say, today's a really crappy day.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
here for you. Just to know that they're not forgotten in their suffering. Because when you lose somebody, especially when you lose a child, that is a lifelong thing that you're always going through.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine. You know, it's funny because the one thing and everyone in my family, especially, and everybody like that loved me was very loving, right? And I didn't have the capacity to be there for anybody really except my kids. But it was funny because my uncle, well, my son Daniel too, but my son Daniel just was like, I'll drive you. He tended to me. This is my firstborn
Yeah.
when I was 16. That totally
Sweet
like,
boy.
oh
Yeah.
my God, rocked my world, right? And then
Hmm.
my uncle came to my house and he sat next to me and he said, like he just sat there and he said, just fall apart. Like, I've got you
Oh,
and
yeah.
just do what you need to do. And I had never experienced, especially from a man, just
Yeah.
coming along. And this is he's my great uncle. He's like more like a
Mm.
father to me than I've ever experienced. But it was him coming alongside and saying, it's okay to fall apart. Like, you know what I mean? And that just spoke to me. It was like the Lord just saying, I got your back, and I didn't know what that was like. But I'll tell you, out of everything anybody did, that was the most powerful. And it was hardly any words. Some people that had the most words agitated me the most. You know what I mean?
They're like Job's friends.
Yeah, and they want to fix it. They want, don't try to fix it. Just leave me be.
Well, when Jesus got to Bethany and realized his friend was dead, what did he do? He wept.
Yeah.
I mean, later he raised them for the dead, and that was awesome.
Right? Yeah.
But I mean, that's the definition of not just intimacy, but empathy is what I was trying to say. There were no platitudes. It wasn't Lazarus is in a better place. God needed another angel, all these really crappy things that people say. He just cried with them. And really, like, if we want to be Jesus's hands and feet, that's what we do for our loved ones, is we just say, okay, you can fall apart with me, and I'm going to be a witness to your experience so that you don't have to fall apart alone.
And we don't know how to allow that because we hurt so much for them that, as in our carnal part, we just want to make everything better. We're so uncomfortable because they're hurting. And so then we're busy trying to do, instead of just letting them be and us standing side by side. I call it laying on the elevator floor. Remember Grey's Anatomy, or the bathroom floor? Remember Grey's Anatomy, where Meredith and
I'm like the only person alive that hasn't watched Grey's Anatomy.
Oh my gosh. Well, there's a scene where she just goes and lays on the bathroom floor, literally puts her face on the bathroom floor with her, because she's like, she just lost the love of her life. They just fell in love. And she just laid on the floor with her, and she held her hand. She said, I'm just going to lay here on the bathroom floor with you. And
see, that's going underwater.
Yes.
For my analogy.
Yes.
I have lots of friends that have not been able to go underwater with me. And I don't take it personally because they're not connected to their own pain. You have to be connected to your own pain.
Yes.
To go deep with somebody and sit in their pain. So the friends of mine and the family members that have not been able to do that, I don't judge them for it.
Right.
They just have not processed their own stuff. But the friends of mine who have laid here on this couch or literally crawled in bed with me, and while I'm like sobbing and almost to the point of dry heaving, have cried with me. Because they're connected to their own grief and their own pain, and they can go underwater with me and help push me back up. So I go, okay, I can do this for a little bit longer. And then I sink again. And then they push me up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you have a friend like that in your life, like, do not let this person go.
Yeah. And that's the
because
thing.
they're not common.
Right. And that's the thing, right? They think they're doing nothing, but they're doing everything. They're doing the most by just being there with you and letting you fall apart. And here's the biggest thing too, right? When we're connected to our pain and we're connected to ourselves in a deep way, we can do that for ourselves also. We don't need to redirect in distraction or, purposely then disconnect, but we could actually sit with ourselves and allow ourselves to be in that pain and to then not fear it. See, that's the thing too. A lot of people fear it. If I allow this, I'll never get out of it. That's a lie. You're just going to move through it. And then when you have somebody that can help you, it's funny because so many people think I got it. I can do it. I can, and I'm the first to say, oh no, I need my team. You know what I mean? Like, I need my team. No. And that's not only whether it's grieving, whether it's loss of self, whatever it is I'm going through. It's like, I need my team, because here's the thing. They can see where I can't. Like you said, you didn't have the capacity to come out of the water and say, help me. Right. And when we need them to go beneath the water, that's where we say, okay, guys, it's like, I'm drowning. Come and figure out how to get me out. But I just really think it's important to, like, for people to understand, whether they're the one grieving or someone they love is grieving, that giving them space, even if they're sitting right next to them, right? Giving them space to be, letting that look like what it needs to look like. And then for the person grieving to create that space to say, hey, be comfortable with where I'm at or not, like it or don't, but this is going to look like what I need it to look like. And I'm not going to try to make you feel better about it.
It's going to look rough for a long time. And if you look at cultures around the world, most of them are doing a better job with this than we are, because they have rituals designed for the community to come around and help a person grieve.
Yeah.
And it looks the same no matter who has passed in the community. You do the same thing, and there's a comfort in the ritual, where in our culture, it looks different for different families. Or like, I've even known people where there's no memorial service because the one that passed didn't want that. Well, you know what? It's not for you. You're gone. That's for, like, I mean,
For us, yeah.
I know you don't like to be the center of attention, but like, I'm sorry, you're dead. Like,
Yeah.
we need a way to mark this moment in our life and say this person was really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because they have such an opportunity to acknowledge, honor, have a voice for what they need finally, the person living, and
Yeah.
I think for me that was the most freeing thing. And whether, it's just people getting out of the world's understanding of grief, getting into the truth that it is very unique for each person and looks different. And we really don't need to, quite honestly, I don't want to rush the process of any grief that I experience, because I want all of the awareness that can come out of it. Because if I'm going to go through a loss that is that devastating, oh, you best believe I'm going to get everything out of it so that I can make it worth it, so to speak. You know what I mean? If I have to experience that level. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I remember with my cousin, I was so mad at him. So I engaged Jesus, and I'm like, Jesus, I need to have it out with him because I just am so unresolved. I know it sounds funny, but I don't engage the dead, right? So I go to Jesus and ask for permission if he can then come in. But what's funny is that I had to have it out with my cousin, because what I noticed in the theme of everyone that I had lost was, you left me. You know what I mean? Like, it was all about me. It was like, you left me. And here, my poor cousin was suffering, but it was like, I had to let that part of me have that exhale with them, where that part can say, okay, now I can grieve you, because I was so unresolved. And even with my mom, I'm like, how dare you leave me? So when people don't give
and that's a common thing, the anger, people don't realize that, because they go, it's not logical. Like, they didn't choose to die, and it doesn't matter. And that has everything to do with our previous trauma. If you are somebody who was literally abandoned before by people, you will experience death as abandonment. And that's why you get your butt into an EMDR therapist.
That's so that
they can, because then you process what we call feeder memories. There's something that came before, and that's how processing trauma is. I mean, when I first learned EMDR, I don't know if you know this, but when we train for EMDR, we have to work on each other as therapists. So I had picked that. Okay. So I had picked a memory that I thought was benign, like not too revealing. And so I told the other therapist, I mean, this is the first time she's ever done EMDR, and I'm the guinea pig, right? And I said, my husband and I had a puppy that died a week later, and it was terrible. And she's like, okay, so here we go. And she's about ready to start. And the trainer, who's now my friend and mentor, Phil Manfield, comes over and he goes, that's not it. And I go, oh no, this is it. This is the one we're going to work on. And we do this thing at EMDR where you focus on the feeling in your body and you let your mind float back to an early memory. And now I am literally in the ugly cry. I've completely fallen apart. And he goes, that's it. And I go, I don't want to do this. And he goes, that's it. And it was my childhood. I don't know what you would even call this woman. She was like a Sunday school teacher in my church. She taught me piano. She drove me to school. I wanted to grow up and be just like, and still cry, just like her. And she died so suddenly and in such a painful way. And I felt so guilty for some things that I literally almost barely played piano for the next 9 years. Like, I could not even think of her.
Wow.
And after doing EMDR for it, her and I had a talk, in my mind, but probably now I know in the spirit also, where she told me how proud of me she was.
Oh, see.
And we had a conversation, and then I thought of like my old boss who was also proud of me, and it just like resolved. And I went home and I not only played the piano, I played her favorite hymn that was sung at her funeral.
Oh, wow.
And then last year I lost my old boss, who then became my friend, who taught me everything I needed to know about domestic violence. was my
Wow.
first supervisor as a therapist who taught me how to be a therapist. And she died a year ago. And I didn't need EMDR for her passing because I had already processed a similar loss, and it just kind of became part of it. And that doesn't mean that I don't cry every once in a while when I pick up the phone and
Right.
want to call her. Because sometimes I get a tough domestic violence case where I go, oh, I want to talk to Terry. And I go, oh crap, I can't call Terry. Like I'm
Yeah.
still going to have that moment of
Right.
pain, but I don't have the shock of her loss
And you had
anymore.
already established those pathways, so now it had a
Yeah.
place to go, right? And that's what I love about EMDR is, and people that maybe don't understand that, is that it bridges those pathways. So you deal with it with that memory and what it is that you're working with, but that then is now established. That framework is now laid. I call them,
Neurologically, it's established.
yeah, yeah. And that's
And the
the
reason
thing.
I had struggled to deal with grief is because the first loss I ever had was traumatic and confusing. So I didn't have a pathway for that.
Yeah, right.
And then eventually, through processing my grandfather, Annalisa was her name, my childhood, like, I don't even know, guru, I guess you call her. Then the losses I've had since have a rut in the road to process. And
Yes.
I'm still going to lose people. Like my EMDR mentor, Phil, he's 74. It's likely I'm going to lose him first. And I am going to cry, and it will be very painful. And there will be days I'm going to want to pick up the phone and call him and he's not
Right.
there. But there's a rut in the road for that now of
Yeah.
knowing that he would still be with me, just like Terry is, just like Elisa is, and other friends that I've lost. So I do want to say something though, if for those listening, how you know that EMDR would be beneficial versus like a grief group or something like that is when you think of that person, if you're struggling to picture them alive, if all you see is the picture of them dead, or if you didn't actually see them dead, you picture their funeral or the sadness, and you can't even grab the memory of them alive, EMDR will resolve that, because all the beautiful memories of them alive will connect to the death and they will become one. And when you think of that person, you'll go, oh, it was really fun when we played basketball together. Or it was really fun when she drove me to school. That was good. And so it'll weave together. And if when you think of your loved one, you feel even 20, 30, 50 years later, actually, I had a client who was 85 and we processed the death of her grandfather from when she was 5.
Wow.
And she let out a scream like she was 5 years old,
Wow.
even 80 years later. Okay,
true.
so if when you think of your loved one that has passed and you feel a physically painful sensation, whether it's tightness in your chest, a punch in the gut, you feel like you're choking, those kind of sensations are from trauma. That is not necessarily part of the grieving process and missing them and getting used to your new normal. That is your body reliving the experience to help you make sense of that. And when you have EMDR, that gets resolved and goes away so that you can think of your loved one and feel at peace in your body. Yes. And that's really the best thing we can have this side of heaven, because we're still going to lose people.
Well, and that's what you helped me with, because, those parts with my mom that I just couldn't, there were those, some of those that were just locked in. And that's what you helped me with. And I really believe that that is what helped me then process, like you said, the grief of my cousin, like you said, for you, the grief of the person that you lost. And here's the thing too, like, a lot of people, they might think that okay, well, if it's traumatic, it's not even just that it's traumatic, it's all scenarios. So I like that you're saying, you're literally explaining to them, if they have these different things, they can't judge it based on if it's traumatic or not, if they need an EMDR therapy. You know what I mean? And the nice thing too is that EMDR, even though you're focusing on these experiences, like you said, it benefits the whole person. The whole person, you know what I mean? And the layers and all of that. I want to say really quick too, for people that are listening to this video and think, like, what? She's, talking to dead people. Yeah, no, this is the thing that, right?
Not what you think.
This is the thing that people don't understand is we live on earth, but we are in the midst of a spirit realm. And there is a
Right.
whole nother reality going on. And just because the person passes physically doesn't mean that they then, have transitioned to completion. And so we sense that, feel that, know that, even if it's not in our level of awareness. So like when you said, you had that unresolved from the teacher, all those years
Yeah.
ago, that's the thing, is that those things, that is how we're bridging the natural and the supernatural in our wholeness with Christ, and as he created us to function in both. So the more and more people start to understand that for themselves and not be afraid of it and get all religious, where they start then saying, oh, that's not appropriate, and they're in a lie, and then it robs them of having peace and joy and reconciliation, and then allowing their loved one to be free and Jesus to come into that, and for the Father's love to really embrace them and surround them. It's like, just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that there's not truth in it, and there's a way in which our spirit resonates with the truth when it's from the Father. And so I would encourage anybody, if they even feel like I need that, lean into it, right? Like lean into it. So talk a little bit about your group, and like if they get a hold of you, and I know you have a waiting list because you're just that amazing, but talk a little bit about
I don't know about that.
About if people, no, I can say that because I know firsthand how amazing you are.
Yeah, it's true. You do.
I do. Can you share a little
We've
bit
known
about
each other a while.
Yeah.
Okay, so my group, we're all independent therapists. So we all each own our own practices, but together we call ourselves Resilience Counseling Group. And so you can find us online, resiliencecounselinggroup.com, and then just read each of our bios. Everybody here knows EMDR, and we all have experience with grief because that is a common life experience. Everybody comes to therapy at some point for that. So, or every therapist has clients dealing with that, is a better way to say that. And so read the bios and see who would be a good fit. Most of us are booked. My wait list is usually about 6 months, unfortunately, especially during COVID, Angel, because people are getting, how do I put this, very triggered by our current situation.
Absolutely.
And so I've had a lot of old clients returning for this or that. And so space has been limited. But if you really feel that I'm the person for you, you can find my info on that website and email me and be on the list.
And I was just going to say, here's the truth. I'm going to say this really quick. Here's the truth. 6 months sounds like a long time, but when you think about how fast time goes by, if you just get on your wait list and then you go about your life, before you know it, it's going to be, close to the time. So if for anybody that might go, oh, that's too long. No, really. It's, you know what I mean? Just get on the wait list.
Also, for many years, I was the only approved EMDR consultant in the Central Valley. So that's basically, I help people learn EMDR. I do these, individual sessions and group sessions with therapists where they bring me their cases and I help them and whatever. So most people in the Valley that have learned EMDR have come through my teaching. And so I have a handle on who I really think is really good at this, and especially good at grief. The one I'm thinking of is also Corinne Suarez. She just became a consultant like me. She has her own story with grief, losing her father at too young of an age, and she has seen a lot of grieving people. Another one is Julie Cardoza. Also, she has her own personal experience with grief, and that has been a subspecialty of hers, and she's certified in EMDR, not a consultant. So if somebody wants to contact me and say, here's my situation, who do you recommend? I'm also happy to do that.
Perfect. And then, so the two that you mentioned are not part of your group, right? Or they
No,
are?
they're not.
And
no,
so
you just have to Google their name.
And in Fresno. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful that you took the time out of your schedule to talk about this, because I just love giving people deeper insight for them to be empowered in really understanding that there's more to things than what we believe or what we know. It's like expand in our capacity to know that there are more things going on than just what the world has taught us. We're dimensional, and there's a lot of moving parts to grief. And if we have this one dimension perspective of what it needs to look like, we're going to be disappointed, and we're not going to ever get there, quote unquote, right? Get there. It's like, it's a joke. Yeah.
I do have one more thing. Let me see if I can find it. I usually am frustrated when people are grieving and we throw books at them, but there is one book that I read in seminary that I always suggest. Let me see. Sometimes I hand it out. So sometimes, oh no, I do have it here.
Cool.
This is the only book on grief I even like.
That's
called
awesome.
Lament for a Son by Nicholas
Okay.
Wolterstorff. It's old. It's almost 40 years old, but you can see it's short.
Wow.
And he was a theology professor at Yale who thought he knew a lot about God. And then his son died in a climbing accident. And it radically shifted his theology. And it reads like a liturgy. It's just beautiful.
Wow.
So can I read just a little passage of
Yeah,
it and
please
then we'll
do.
close?
Yes.
This
Oh
is
my
my
gosh.
favorite part. He says, "How is faith to endure, O God, when you allow all this scraping and tearing on us?" And he's imagining his son falling from the mountain, right? "You have allowed rivers of blood to flow, mountains of suffering to pile up, sobs to become humanity's song, all without lifting a finger that we could see. You have allowed bonds of love beyond number to be painfully snapped. If you have not abandoned us, please explain yourself." We strain to hear, but instead of hearing an answer, we catch sight of God himself scraped and torn. Through our tears, we see the tears of God. A new and more disturbing question now arises. Why do you permit yourself to suffer, O God? If the death of the devout costs you dear, why do you permit it? Why do you not grasp joy? And I think as sad as that passage is, that is the hope we have, is that God himself was scraped and torn and experienced suffering and experienced death and experienced grief. And we know that he is with us. There is no emotion and no grief too deep that he has not felt himself.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, for whatever reason, he has decided, instead of ordering things around so perfectly, he has decided to work in us and through us. And we are his imagers and we are his vessels. And the relationship with us was more important.
That's the truth.
And that is what we, even in our grief, that is what we have, is that he is with us. Even though all has not been made right yet. We're in the already not yet. So
I love that. I love that you shared that. Too, I have to say, my resurrection that he gave to me came when I had my breakdown and when I experienced the death of myself, when I allowed that scraping, when I allowed myself to just kind of lean in and, like you say, connect to it. I absolutely then came to life, because it was like I was dead before that. And I didn't even know that. I was walking dead. And that's what a lot of people don't realize, is that not only have we experienced loss of self, but there's a process where we get to actually die in the way that we can then enter into the resurrection and then be awakened. And I think the world gets it really wrong when they interpret what the Lord says in dying to self. I think they really have it wrong.
They don't get it.
No. And that's the thing. I'm like, Lord, I would love to do like a group thing on that, because it's that misunderstanding.
That's a whole other day, Angel.
I know.
You get me going on that.
Okay. Well, that'll be our next lounge chat then. So we just have our next title. I love it. But anyway, I love you so much. And I'm just so grateful for you. And I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay. Bye, everybody.